If you look at the arguments that they're using about these so-called skilled immigrants and why we need them, the most insulting part of it that I think if you're an American out there, this should piss you off, and pardon my language, but it really should. You should be really teed off at this, because what they've basically said to you, and Vivek said this in his statement around Christmas, is you're just not smart enough. You're just not good enough. You're just not sophisticated enough. You were born here, but we don't really care about you because, you don't have what it takes.
Welcome to the Elizabeth Farah Show, and that is me. I'm CEO and editor-in-chief of WorldNetDaily, also the co-founder with my husband, Joseph Farah. I'm doing an ongoing series called America First Immigration. Why a series, you ask? Because this will be, I believe, this is my opinion, a defining legacy of the Trump administration. He's going to be known for what he does or doesn't do here. What we do with the labyrinth of so-called legal immigration programs that were not designed to get the best and the brightest in the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and medicine, but explicitly designed to lower the cost of staffing tech companies, universities, research labs, and much, much more. You can see how important this is. This is a hidden illegal immigration, as the corporations that use this system do so illegally. The consequence is that Americans are not being trained and hired in these fields. They're not being cultivated and mentored. They are being replaced by a foreign workforce. This is equal to the disaster of offshoring manufacturing. We are in effect offshoring the labor. This will only be reformed if we act during this administration. The stakes are high, and I believe in America First Immigration. I am so glad, Eduardo Neret, that you are here to join me, because I heard you speaking on this, and what you said was so concise and interesting and thoughtful that I want to have you on to enlighten me and have a conversation about it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And Elizabeth, I just have to say, your entire laying out there of what Trump's legacy is going to be, what he was really elected to do, I couldn't agree with more. When I look at President Trump's candidacy, and there's a lot of reasons why people voted for him, obviously his coalition this time around is so much larger than it was before. But if you go back to the early days of 2015, for those of us who were around, and I was there, it was all about immigration. It was all about reducing the number of immigrants who are coming into our country, because really what the system has evolved into is one that hurts Americans, it hurts American workers, and it hurts our country. And we've only seen that increase under Joe Biden. When people want to throw around the terms illegal versus legal, I've argued for quite some time that is now meaningless. I mean, what Biden has done, he has basically decriminalized all forms of border crossing, that it doesn't matter. I mean, a lot of the people who came under Joe Biden did so legally, so to speak, but the effect is the same. And the goal is to radically transform America, transform American cities, transform the American economy and culture. We as a country, and no country could do this. You could not absorb tens of millions of new people who don't really share your culture, they don't share your language, they don't share your values. You cannot absorb all of those people overnight and expect to have the same country. I mean, the example I always like to give people, because people always use this excuse of, well, America's always been a nation of immigrants. That's totally a separate myth that I'd love to tackle maybe later in the show. But let's take the example of Japan, for example. If Japan tomorrow, or if Japan in a 5-year span, started taking millions and millions of immigrants from India and Nigeria, as an example, so much so that, let's say, 20 to 30% of the Japanese population were now Nigerians and Indians, or you name it, pick whatever country. Would it be fair to say that Japan is still Japan? I don't think so. I mean, my argument is no, it wouldn't be. Now, I'm not saying that would mean Japan's a terrible country. Maybe it's going to be better in some ways. Maybe it's going to be worse. There's going to be differences. But the idea that you can just replace a country's populace, people who have been there for thousands and thousands of years, hundreds of years, or to radically change a culture, it wouldn't be allowed. No other country in the world could you do what is being done to the United States and people not argue like it's an invasion of their country and their values. I mean, again, to take any sort of example, if you took a Middle Eastern country and you made the population 30, 40% Christian overnight from Christians from Europe, I mean, is that country going to be the same? Do the reverse. If you take a bunch of Muslims from the Middle East and transport them to some Christian country, is it going to be the same? No, and we're seeing that right now in Europe. So again, you could do it anywhere. You could do it all around the world. If you took a bunch of, let's say, Chinese and moved them to a country in Africa and they became 50% of the population, 30, 40% of the population, Is that country going to have the same African culture and values that it did before? It's not. This is what the United States is experiencing. We are told by globalists around the world that we just have to take it, that we're a country of immigrants, that America is different, that we should accept everybody. And I think Trump was elected to stop that. He was elected to stop it the first time in 2016. And he was given an even greater mandate to do so this time, because I think you even saw people who before, maybe they didn't like the rhetoric, maybe they thought the immigration policies were harsh. They saw what the reverse gets you. They saw under Joe Biden, millions and millions of people come into this country. And that's why you have now over 50% of Americans supporting Trump's immigration policies and supporting things like mass deportation.
I think I'm obviously not the only one that uses the same kind of examples that you just gave us. Japan is a really beautiful example because the Japanese are not going to do this to their nation. That they're not bashful about it. They're not going to allow this to happen. But I think that the world is a better place because we have a Japan that's Japanese, and a Mexico that's Mexican, and a France that is French, and an America that's American. And you cannot import millions upon millions of people from another culture, and it is not racism to say that they're coming from a culture that is incompatible often, and it will fundamentally and irrevocably, because you can't take it back. That's the thing that the Dems, the globalists, they know this. You cannot take it back once you have significantly altered the demographics of a country. Most people think that England is probably never going to recover, or France.
No.
Who knows?
Right.
But I hold out a little light of hope. But why should we do this when we're actually seeing it destroy nation after nation after nation, especially in the West? The major population centers are China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, these high population nations that if they sent only 10% of their population, we would be literally either Pakistan, India, China, or whatever. Why would we want two communist Chinas or, two Pakistans, two Indias? We've got one. And God bless them. Let's have them make China great again, which would take a great deal of, we would hope that for them. And let's make India great and Pakistan great. But we don't want to dilute America and destroy it. And I think a lot of this, I think the next step we look at is jobs. What about Americans? I mean, shouldn't we care first and foremost about hiring Americans?
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more on everything you laid out there as well. I guess we're on the same page on this. Something I think about is the idea of nationhood. I mean, I've only been around the years I have been in this country since I've been on this earth, but it seems when you look at American history, we didn't have this globalized idea of what nations could be. I mean, you talked about letting the French be French, letting Japan be Japanese. And it seems today we live in a global society that wants to sort of dilute what each of these identities are, what each of these nation states and their people are, and let's just be one world people. Let's all be the same. We're all humans. Global culture, global values, global economy. And the problem with that, there are many, but number one is they're doing this at the same time while telling the rest of us we live in a democracy, right? The will of the people is the most important thing. Well, when did Americans vote for this? I mean, when did the American people vote to, as you say, dilute their jobs, dilute their communities, dilute their cultures? This is something I wanted to touch upon too. This is not to say that you can't have immigrants from anywhere assimilate into the United States. Actually, we have a history of doing that. It can be done in certain ways. But one way I know for a fact that it can't be done is the way we're doing it now. In other words, if you just allow mass millions and millions and millions of people to come and allow them basically to live in the same states, to live in the same communities, and you're really making it easy for them to not assimilate, you're letting them exist here without having to assimilate, without having to learn the language or the culture, then you make it impossible. I mean, what you're then doing is balkanizing the United States. You're creating different ethnic regions and different cultures and communities, and it leads to a nation that feels divided, a nation that doesn't feel unified. And I mean, what does every single poll out there show? It shows that for the last several decades, Americans have felt more and more divided. We feel less and less unified as a country. One more thing too, before we get to the workers. when you look at the immigration system as it exists now, and you said this before, it's really not diverse. I mean, basically, since Ted Kennedy's Immigration Act of the 1960s, we basically have immigration from the same few countries. You have mass immigration from East Asia and from Latin America. I mean, those two regions dominate immigration into the United States. It is primarily immigration from the third world. We are no longer getting immigrants from Europe, which again is, people can disagree with that. People can make their arguments as to why, we shouldn't let them in. But the fact is European nations and European values are most closely aligned with ours and our founding. So if you're going to look for people around the world who would most easily and most quickly assimilate into the United States, you would look right there. And so again, I don't have anything against these other cultures around the world, but look, if I wanted to live in India, I would move to India. If I wanted to live in Latin America, and by the way, I say this as someone who has been to Latin America many times. I have family there. There are certainly things I like about those countries when I visit. But if I wanted to live there, I would live there. I am not in favor, and most Americans are not in favor of turning the United States into any of these countries. On the issue of the foreign workers,
let me just pause, but let's
go ahead.
That in just a minute.
Yeah.
We hear there's so many cliches, best and brightest, blah, blah, blah. There's so many cliches, but one of the things that we have to continually remind ourselves is diversity is not our strength. Diversity is our strength when you're deciding what takeout to get and what restaurant to go. I want to know, like sushi, my Indian food. I love diversity there, but diversity of values, ideas. Yes, great. Let's have a diversity of ideas and debate this. Just like this H-1B exploded on X several weeks ago, and we had a clash, and it was a big, beautiful thing, as Trump might say. But diversity, unity is our strength. Unity of culture, of what we value. If I go to Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, I will not share virtually any significant, what I would say, existential understanding or value. I do not agree with Saudi Arabia's, and God bless them. I don't hate Saudi Arabia, and I don't hate Pakistan, but I would disagree with almost all of what they do and believe to be important and valuable and true. Why would I think that having a culture where if you had one person like me, one person from Pakistan, I'm talking about like 25% of a culture is each, how is that? That's a clash. Disunity is not our greatest strength. Diversity is really disunity by another name that makes it sound and smell like a rose, but it's not.
Totally. It's so absurd. This idea that the more different you are from the people around you, the stronger it makes you. In what area of your life does that work? Does that work in your marriage, as an example? If the more you share in disagreement with your spouse, or the fewer things you have in common, the stronger your marriage will be. So the same thing with your community, your state. I mean, think about your church. I mean, let's think of the communities in which humans, especially Americans, have existed basically since our founding. You think of your locality, you think of your church communities, you think of the family unit. Really? I mean, the fewer things we have in common in each of those units, those make us stronger. That's just complete. That doesn't pass any sort of basic logic test. It's a phony slogan that has been thrown around and indoctrinated into people's brains. You know what? You bringing that up also made me think of the national motto that we see on a lot of our coins and things like that: E pluribus unum, out of many one. It's not out of one country, many different people. No, out of many different peoples, one country, one American country, one value, one culture, and things like that. And again, I just fear in many ways it might be too late. Trump's election is that one best last hope that we have. He's got 4 years to really stop this, put a stop to it, and maybe reverse some of the trends that we've seen. But we are not going to function in the same. Again, I don't want to be hyperbolic here. Will America continue to exist? Yeah, it might exist, but will we be as prosperous? Will we be as successful? Will we be the same country that you and I grew up in? I don't think so. I mean, again, you could argue there will be some things that are better. There will definitely be some things that are worse. That's how life works. Nothing is all net positive or all negative. But again, the country is changing. All of the world is changing, like you said, England, France, and it's just a factual matter that if we don't put a stop to this, the United States is going to be a lot different. And I would rather not take that gamble. I don't want to take the risk and roll the dice and say, well, let's just see what happens, and maybe the country will be better off for it. I'd rather not do that. I like what we have now. I think most people do. It's worked for us for the last 100 years. We've been the world's leading superpower, and we should try to keep it that way.
Yeah, the values that we're talking about, that we have diversity, we don't care about skin color or race. I mean, that's for most of us, at least in our realm of thinking. I don't know about the leftists, but that is so laughable that would be what I would care about. Skin color or where you're from. I find it interesting. We were talking about France and, before you have a French last name, but that's it. What I'm worried about and concerned, what I think that we must decide and solve in this first 2 to 4 years is the idea that we can import ideas and philosophies, values, ethics, religious ideals that are anathema to our own. Now, if you mentioned mass immigration, it's one thing when you bring an Indian, a Saudi Arabian, a Jordanian, whatever, from all over the world, Ethiopian, and even a Canadian couldn't destroy our country. But no, you bring them in, and then they live in a community surrounded by Americans who've been here all their lives and their generations, and they absorb, they have the ability. But when you bring in 20,000, 30,000, 2 million, 20 million, what you're doing is concentrating. You can't take a glass of milk and pour a half a glass of milk and pour in, say, twice as much coffee and end up. But if you put a drop of coffee in a glass of milk, it's just going to dissipate. And there's a big difference in the approach that we take. But the thing that we're diverse on are the most fundamental values, ideas, and beliefs, the things that we believe to be reality and true. And if that is the case, then the very survival of what and who America is on the table here. And let's go now, because I could continue with that as I think you could. You're so brilliantly eloquent. Let's look at jobs and how H-1B was created. Did you read Eric Weinstein's short article on this?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was what I was prepared to talk about today. I'm working on a post on it on my Substack right now, and you can find it neretfiles.com. That'll be up later today. But Eric is one of the few who knows the real history of this issue. It's often not talked about enough. So, as you said, we had this explosion over the H-1B issue over Christmas, and we can get into that. I think most people saw, you had Elon, Vivek, President Trump weigh in, MAGA was really upset about this around Christmas, and that is its own issue. But few people brought up how we got here. And so, if you'll, I don't want to take too long from the floor.
No, this is core. This is core.
Yes, okay.
I know it. I want everybody to know it. And I think you're going to say it better than I could. So go right ahead.
So the Cliff Notes version of this for the American people out there, the H-1B visa was created in 1990. Congress passed an Immigration Reform Act that did many things, and one of which was it created a set number of what was supposedly to be skilled immigrant visas to be allowed to companies into the United States. Now, taking a couple steps back, why did Congress do that? Well, as Eric Weinstein, and if you're not familiar with his work out there, the audience, I would invite you to go look it up. He's a brilliant guy. He's a mathematician, venture capitalist. He has a famous brother who does great work as well. He's in the science world, so he's in this world. He saw it firsthand. And if you read his article, you'll see that in the years leading up to this congressional law, you had organizations like the National Science Foundation, the National Academy of Sciences, all of these organizations. I mean, they're not really unions, but for the sake of the conversation,
let me add one little thing here.
Sure.
The GUIRR really shocked me because I didn't know what that was. And it's the Government University Industry research roundtable. What is the one thing what is the one group of people that are not involved in this roundtable that is making massive policy recommendations regarding immigration and science, technology, and all that? It's students. It's the
right.
very people that are having their jobs taken from them. There's no oversight there. Nobody's sitting there representing you and me and our kids and our brothers and sisters and everything saying, wait a minute, where's my job? What happens to the American labor? Go ahead.
So they have these groups supposedly representing science, representing our universities. All these groups were sounding the alarm, a fake alarm, saying that if we don't allow the importation of the best and brightest around the world soon, America will fall behind. So they were alarming Congress about this. And what Eric took a look at, he said, in order for them to have said this, they would have needed a study to back it up. And he found, and this is what shocked me as well, he found a study that was anonymously published, undated, published by the National Science Foundation, that basically took our free market economy, which again, in the free market, you have supply and demand. You can't just look at the supply side of things. But what they did is they conducted a study. They removed the demand side of labor. Again, so for the audience, I know it's a little hard to follow along, but they were basically looking at the issue of STEM workers in this country. And they were saying, we have a shortage of workers. And it really wasn't an issue about a shortage of workers. What they were really doing is trying to create, through this fake, phony study that, again, had no name on it. It was undated. They just sort of published it out there and they pushed it to Congress. So Congress, this was one of the studies that influenced Congress to make this decision. This phony little study that basically argued America does not have the amount of workers necessary in STEM fields to advance. Now, what they didn't do, and what is very obvious to any, if you take Econ 101 in high school, things aren't just supply-sided. You can't just say, we don't have enough of this in this country. Because if you live in a market economy as we do, the market will eventually correct itself. And so that's what Eric argued in his piece, is that sure, you could have a short-term shortage of something in a free market. But in a free market, when you have the demand working in conjunction with the supply, you will eventually get to a point where that shortage is met. And so Eric's argument was, there was no, and many other economists actually testified to Congress at the time that this bill was being argued before Congress in 1990, and they said, there's no such thing. I mean, this is bogus. There is no shortage of STEM workers in this country. What you have is maybe a reluctance to pay increased wages to attract. In other words, they didn't want to increase wages to get the demand, to increase demand among students out there, workers saying, hey, okay, fine, I will go study STEM. I will go study these fields to get those jobs. So sorry, I know it's a little confusing.
No, let's slow down. Let's pause here for a moment. And that was a great summary. Thank you. Very good summary. One of the things that I found interesting is he was studying immigration. And I don't know to what purpose, but that's when he started thinking about this. So he decided there's got to be the paper, like you said, there's got to be a study, because that's what always undergirds this kind of legislation. And he said it's got to be supply and demand, it's got to be out there. But I think he even speculated, I have a feeling that what they did was separate one from another. So he went into a hunch through all of these archives, or the searching of these databases of studies, and he found this. And you said it was unnamed. When he called he said, when I got up the nerve to call them, he said, I asked them who did this, and they gave me an economist. And he said the economist was really top notch, didn't he? And he said that the economist knew I don't even think the economist was bought into this. He did the study, and then the NSF, the National Science Foundation, sliced out the demand, as you just said, right? And then put it forward. But here was an intelligent guy, a legit study, but they just then perverted it deliberately, obviously, to get the end that they wanted. And what I also found interesting, and maybe you could speak to this, is that they have explicitly stated, and Weinstein also posted this little excerpt, and I would love to, I don't know, do you have the whole paper? He posted that little excerpt.
I have a bit that I actually wanted to quote here once you
quote. Quote it, because this is so important.
And again, just to summarize for the audience who are following along, basically what you had were organizations that claim to represent scientists, universities, and things like that, what they did was they used a couple of phony studies arguing that the United States had a shortage of talent, and they used those shoddy studies to lobby to Congress and raise the alarm and act like the world was going to come to an end if the United States didn't start importing foreign workers. So that's what all this is based on. In particular, it's based off one study, and I want to read the study here so people can look it up. It's called The Pipeline for Scientific and Technical Personnel, Past Lessons Applied to Future Changes of Interest to Policymakers. And here's how Weinstein talks about the study, which I think is important. He says, as the study makes clear, the problem being solved was not a problem of talent, but one of price. In other words, these groups didn't want to pay Americans what they were worth in the science field. He says scientific employers had become alarmed that they would have to pay competitive market wages to U.S. PhDs with other options. The study's aim was not to locate talent. In other words, if it was really about talent and you really had, we were really struggling to get the best and brightest Americans out there, offer a crazy salary. I mean, they are out there. So the goal wasn't to find that talent, as he says here, rather, quote, but to weaken its ability to bargain with employers by using foreign labor to undermine the ability to negotiate for new PhDs. They had hoped to keep the U.S. research system staffed with employees classified as trainees, students, and postdocs. Why? All for the benefit of employers. They didn't want to recognize and pay American talent what they deserved. And they're still doing that. I mean, we're suffering the same thing ever since this law had been passed.
So what they've been doing for 30 plus years is suppressing wages. And the National Science Foundation, I believe Eric Weinstein actually takes this conclusion that these various science and education organizations that are tasked with looking at the issues, and I've gone and spent some time on some of their websites, and I'm going to go back. They're tasked with making sure America's got the best and brightest, and we're fully competitive in the market of science, technology, engineering, and medicine. Is the M is for medicine, right?
Math.
I knew I was getting that wrong. And there is another one where they add medicine. There's a secondary one that they add medicine to. So I wasn't all wrong. Anyway, that they were in actuality, and isn't this how it always ends up? You can almost default to this. That instead of having America's best interests as their core value and purpose, they were representing employers, almost like the shop steward, or, they're not the shop steward. That would be the reverse. They were representing the commercial, the corporate interests, as opposed to America in general, our interests in to be competitive for national security purposes and everything, but also the interests of, hey, does anybody know an 18-year-old out there or a 15-year-old that they want? My son, the doctor, my son, the engineer. We all know kids, and we're all looking at their aspirations and trying to mentor and cultivate those aspirations so that they can go on to do great things for America, and that they could be fulfilled in their choice of careers, their dreams. And what we're doing is, now this is where my question is going to come in. It seems to me that when only, I think, some 62% of STEM field, those who are educated in the STEM fields, that are actually in that industry after they leave higher education, that what they're finding is that the job market is not robust, that the salaries are not there. And I would go so far to say that it's axiomatic that when the demand is not there, because we're artificially lowering the demand, then people say, your doctor or your professor or whoever is influencing your parents say, look, that's not a really great field anymore to go into because there aren't that many jobs and the wages are pretty low. It seems to me that not only are we not having a free market here, which I demand, for our country, a competitive market, but we're actually artificially pushing young people away from the STEM field because they know that there really isn't that great of a future in it. Explain that or comment on that.
Correct. We are doing that. I want to go back a little bit too, just quickly on the economics of it. There's also a cultural aspect too that Eric talked about, and I had wondered too before even reading what he read. I mean, there's got to be something about these so-called skilled immigrants from India and China that these employers really want over the Americans. So it's not just the wage thing, but it's cultural too. So Eric, having worked in science, the science field his entire life, argued that Americans, there's a certain aspect of our scientific community that has existed for decades that's about creativity, that's kind of challenging the norms, right? That's how you discover new things in your field. That's kind of pushing back against authority. And he says that in a lot of our university systems, that's where this has existed. As an aside note, for most Americans to kind of visualize what I think is what he's describing is, for me, when I was reading that, I thought of the movie Oppenheimer. If you saw that movie last year, that blockbuster, there's some scenes early on in the movie where the scientists are gathering and they're sort of challenging the status quo on what they had been taught, and they would have these fierce debates, and they would sometimes toe outside of the line of what they were allowed to do, maybe even on their own campuses, to kind of push the limits of discovery and push the limits of what they were looking to find out. And I think we look at other cultures, specifically in Asia, and Eric talked about this too, that are more focused on obedience, more focused on putting your head down. And so there's an aspect to that too with the H-1Bs is they want workers who are going to be more compliant, who can be controlled. As it is, it's very hard to leave your job if you are an H-1B recipient. If you got to your job and you didn't like it and you wanted to find another one, they make it very hard to do so. So of course, who wins in that scenario? The company. They're paying you less, they're overworking you than maybe an American would. You're an immigrant who's just come to this country. You're going to want to work hard and do what you think you need to do to be able to stay. So the whole system is rife to abuse. Now, to answer your question about what we're doing to Americans, it's completely insulting. I mean, if you look at the arguments that these people make as to why we need these, again, I say so-called because I refuse to buy into that argument. These are not skilled immigrants. These immigrants are not better than the people we have in this country. But if you look at the arguments that they're using about these so-called skilled immigrants and why we need them, the most insulting part of it that I think if you're an American out there, this should piss you off. And pardon my language, but it really should. You should be really teed off at this, because what they've basically said to you, and Vivek said this in his statement around Christmas, is you're just not smart enough. You're just not good enough. You're just not sophisticated enough. You were born here, but we don't really care about you because, you don't have what it takes. And let's even assume for a second that part of that argument is true. So let's say, which again, it's not, but let's say that there is an element where America is lagging behind in XYZ field. You pick it. Instead of making the case that America's lagging behind, here's how. Here's my plan to train Americans. Here's my plan to boost us up from within so we can compete with the rest of the world. They're not even making that argument. So that's how you know they don't even believe what they're saying. They're not even making the argument of, oh, America is behind in this area. Here's how we're going to make it better. It's just circumventing the American worker. It's like, we don't care about you. We're going to get some labor from the third world who will do it for cheaper, who will do it more compliantly. And I think that's what's so insulting about it. I mean, again, this is a system, rather, this is a country. We don't live in an economic zone. We don't live in a giant LLC. We don't live in a corporation. And
we're not an idea. We're not a corporation. We're human beings with a culture. And our culture is not one of inadequacy and mediocrity. It is a culture. The only reason we are where we are is because our culture has been about meritocracy and about free. When I say free thinkers, I mean, when you talk about those fierce debates, absolutely, that movie was perfect about that. There's probably so many other movies that we could come up with for examples where there are fierce debates. They're butting heads. One guy may be all wrong, but he was the one that everybody thought was right. And then the little guy comes up who's been bucking the system and saying, no, you're wrong, to the big guy. Probably going to lose his fiance and his boss and lose his job and everything. And he ends up winning. And a lot of these stories are very true to life stories. And Americans have grit. They have independence, and they are not servile. And if we continue to do this thing where we're taking the culture and we are making a culture of worker bees, like the Borg idea, and we're just a bunch of servile minions or pawns, that's what our cultures can be destroyed. Not usually overnight, but little by little by little, eat away at the edges until basically there's just a small minority there. But you know what? At this election on November 1st, I had my hope fully restored in the culture and the heart and the minds of the American people, because I thought for President Trump and the whole team, J.D. Vance particularly as well, to win that election meant that the American people were not beyond hope on this stuff. They were just not. They got it. And we brought in all these people. And I want to focus for a moment on minority communities, because when I think one of the things that breaks my heart the most is that there are so many young Black men. I say Black men, it's women too, but I think about these young Black men that they're in junior and senior high school, and they're going to go a wrong direction for a lot of different reasons. The numbers are there, many of them. And I think if we grabbed them early and gave them a vision, if the guys like the Elon Musks and the Vivek Ramaswamis and others who are Black men and women in the field were mentoring a whole population of junior high school kids and freshmen and saying, look what you can do, and we will teach you how to do this, and we will mentor you, whatever kind of programs we put together. You think that we could lift up the inner cities and lift up Black American, especially those young men, that they've got the testosterone to be out there doing something, and they're sitting in a little high school class with some teacher that's teaching them something that seems so irrelevant to him, and probably is, and he'd rather out there be working or getting in a trade school to learn something, where he gets out there and does something. And do you know what? They're going to start marrying the women that they sleep with. They're going to start building families and building those inner cities into a flowering, renaissance. Take Harlem back to the old days. So tell me what you think about where we are failing the junior and high school students. I mean, sure, we could go back to kindergarten, and where tech giants and the tech bros could have been for 30 some years. They're telling me that they haven't done anything for 30 years, and now suddenly, when we've got the one guy who can change all this, Donald J. Trump. No, we don't have time. We don't have time to do that. Go ahead.
Well, Steve Bannon made that point exactly on that show on Showtime. I think it's called The Circus, the political show that's existed for a while. He said, I don't want to staff our Silicon Valley companies with people from the third world or from wherever you are. And he was basically saying, I don't care if you're actually that smart. We've got talented Black and Hispanic kids in the inner city. We have talented poor white kids in middle America who have the talent, who exhibit that talent, like you say, in ages like junior high and college and whatnot, that we can be taking their talents and putting them in these companies. We shouldn't be going around the world to do that. And part of the problem, you asked me before, are we discouraging these kids? We are. So just here's one example. From the period of 2014 to 2019, this 5-year period, 2 Rutgers University's professors examined the growth of the IT sector. And they found that IT jobs in that 5-year period had increased by 20%. So the jobs were just going through the roof right before COVID. But yet in that same time period, wages for those same jobs only increased 3%. So you want to talk about discouraging someone? That's it right there. I mean, you're looking and you're being told, oh, you got to go study tech, you got to, IT, STEM, and someone's looking as inflation's going up, as things are becoming much more and more expensive than they ever have been in this country. And you see that the wage increase is barely keeping up with inflation. I mean, it's at 2 to 3%. Why would that attract someone to that job? It wouldn't. And you say that statistic earlier, 62% of Americans with STEM degrees don't even work in STEM. What does that mean? They're working in other fields. And I think of it today, we all went to school with them, we all know these people. I mean, you talk about a genius, someone who's maybe the smartest in the class, all of those kids all end up working in finance. Those kids end up going to law school. They end up going to medical school. I can't think of a single kid that I went to school with who maybe exhibited that level of intelligence who went on to go work in Silicon Valley. And in fact, the one that I can think of who's immensely talented, he worked closely with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, he dropped out of high school. And that's something that I want to talk about now really briefly, because you asked me about these kids. You want to talk about how we're failing the students? One way is by forcing kids to go to school for 4 to 5, 6 years to take on all this debt to do something that could be done in maybe 2 to 3 years. So we should be adopting the European model. In many European countries, like France, for example, you graduate their equivalent to high school. And if you have the proper test scores, in other words, if you display competency in whatever field you want to study after that, for example, let's say law, you go directly into what their equivalent of law school is, and you graduate in 2 to 3 years instead of doing 4 years of undergrad, then 2 to 3 years of law school and things of that nature. And again, who is benefiting from that system? The universities, who have these inflated budgets to do God knows what but educate our kids. The professors, all of these administrative positions in the universities who are paid six-figure salaries to, again, do God knows what.
But we know destroy the minds and hearts and the thinking.
That's true.
Yeah, but we won't go there.
They're definitely not doing what their salary commands. And so if we really want to help and harvest that American talent, one thing I know we can do right now is to reform the education system, create a system by which we start identifying the immensely talented in high school. It could be through standardized tests, which the left has wanted to get rid of, which is curious to me. I mean, how else do you hope to uplift the so-called, so again, you can't even uplift the best and brightest in your own country because a standardized test is racist or something, but we're okay with going halfway around the world for it. So bring back standardized testing. You could identify those kids early on and say, you know what, we'll pay for part of your education, the US government will, or maybe all of it, if you study STEM, and you have to maintain this certain grade level or whatever, or you're out of the program. There should be some sort of system that does that. And then say, we'll fast track you. I mean, you can graduate from college in 2 years. You just go straight in, forget these humanities and these other courses, go straight into the STEM. And that's how you get the STEM work. I mean, it's really not that hard. The talent is here. It would help the American students, and it would help supposedly the Silicon Valley companies who say they need that work now. Again, it's curious to me that they never offer solutions that uplift Americans. They never seem to look within. If there really was a shortage, and if they really cared about Americans, they would talk about these types of things. They would talk about what programs we can implement. But it's not about that to them. Instead, it's, hey, we need to go to India. We need to go to China. We need to get people from halfway around the world. And by the way, we have no interest at all in improving the system we have here. You
know, I've given so much thought. I just jot, notes and I just will pause and think about what could have been done. 1991, that law went into effect. And at that point, what somebody who had the best interest of American children, American citizens, American labor force, workforce, if they had proper intentions and motivations, what they would have done is say, well, we're going to do this now, but clearly, we have to resolve this issue in a more holistic and a permanent way. Why don't we think about building the infrastructure of America? And by infrastructure, I mean the educational system is obviously broken. It has been broken for decades. Certainly in 1991, we all knew that it was broken. And also build the infrastructure of a workforce. And I'm not talking about just drones. I'm talking about a vibrant, brilliant, best and brightest workforce. And if we just solve the problem by saying, well, we can't do that hard work, roll up our sleeves and do this work here in America to build an infrastructure in those two areas. We'll just go and get some cheap labor from third world countries that have $1,500, $2,000 a year GDP per capita, and we'll just bring them in here. They're going to be so grateful they'd be grateful for $50,000 a year. And we give them $80,000, $90,000 eventually. They're going to be just great and send half that country money home, and their relatives will be rich. But we have not built anything. At the beginning, I said something about the outsourcing of manufacturing. So all of this manufacturing went out across the world into countries where they could pay semi-servants or actual slaves pennies, and that structural loss, that infrastructure loss devastated our economy and our workforce. Now we're having to say, oh, that was a mistake. Why don't we reshore these things? Okay. But we've been doing the offshoring of our workers by bringing them in. Sure, they actually mostly are coming in here, but then they're still we're offshoring in effect. And so I've given this thought about what we could be doing, and you've had some ideas. I thought one was interesting we could touch on, but one of them is this. If we have this multi-billion dollar industry, and we have been throwing also in the federal government billions upon billions of dollars into, God forbid, the Green New Scam, and also into DEI. And if instead of destroying this country with these billions of dollars, if tech actually said, and by the way, Steve Bannon said, no, we don't want anything from tech because they'll pervert anything they've got. So I have to respect that concept too. But if we built a structure, if you put in a few $billions, you could within 6 months, because it's all out there already, have a training for junior to senior high school students like that could literally put them into motion of going into the training that you're talking about, 2-year degree. I love it. And that could be literally funded into, what do you call those schools where they're magnet schools and home
Right.
schools and co-op schools? My kids were homeschooled, so co-op schools and, schools that actually will implement. We will have an office right in the middle of the Midwest. Tech could put there and say, we will help every one of you schools if you need help to implement this program. And within a couple of years, we literally have our first graduates out of it. We graduate 4+ million high school seniors every year. 30+% of those say they want to go into STEM. That's over 1 million. It's 1.2 million, whatever it is exactly, 1.3 million. They want to go into STEM every year. Why wouldn't we be able to, within 2 years, seniors today, take them by the scruff of the neck, get them through that 2-year program? Why can't we put it, what did Trump call what was the COVID vaccine program called?
Oh, warp speed.
Warp speed. Why don't we put this on warp speed? So tell me what your other thoughts are on what we could do in education.
We should fast track something like this, and like you say, this law has been on the books since 1990. So what? We've really had a shortage for that long that has been unaddressed. I mean, what it should have been was, again, first of all, it shouldn't have even been passed. But in order to not radically change this country and our immigration system, Congress should have said, okay, fine. If you really need it, we'll approve a 2-year program. It expires in 2 years. In that time span, we expect to see other solutions that focus on this country instead of the rest of the world. They didn't do that. And I think part of the problem is we're living in this post-Reagan mentality, which I don't even really blame Ronald Reagan himself. I love President Reagan, but a lot of his supporters and a lot of the movement that he birthed have created this system and this discourse by which if you support or call for anything that maybe decreases the bottom line of a business, you're somehow anti-business, you're a socialist, you're a communist. But what, are we supposed to allow them to increase their bottom line in perpetuity for infinity, and even at the expense of keeping American wages basically stagnant for 40 years before we say something? And so this is an argument as an aside, not to go down this tangent, but these are the same people who warn you about socialism and who boogeyman about socialism. Well, if you don't want socialism to take hold in this country, you cannot ignore the plight of American workers. You cannot ignore the fact that wages have been stagnant and then throw your hands up and wonder why people are teed off about income inequality, why they're teed off about the state of their economy and the jobs out there. In terms of what we can do besides just a warp speed program, let's say for high school students, one thing we could do is we could make it cheaper for companies to hire Americans than the foreign counterparts. And I don't mean by lowering American wages, but this does already exist with the H-1B system. I mean, there's a small application fee that they have to pay, that the company has to pay. But I'm talking about there should be a system by which every year that H-1B recipient is on a company's payroll, they have to pay a significantly larger tax. And that tax should go to a fund, again, that helps train American workers. One thing that we could do too is with the you're not going to be able to say, I think, overnight, every H-1B recipient here has to go home or whatever. But again, if we really don't have that talent in this country, which again is bogus, but one thing we could do right away is require that each one of those H-1B recipients have an American shadowing them right now, shadowing them for a year or 2 years. And as soon as basically that their visa expired, because the H-1B initially is just a 3-year visa, when that visa expires, I think an American would know how to do that job at that point after 3 years. And at that point, you could say, thank you for your service to the H-1B recipient, and allow the American to take over the job. So there's so many ways that this can be done. It's not complicated. And what it really comes down to is money, like most things in this world. I hate to say it, but just a couple of stats for your audience to know. Number one is that they like to act as though most of these H-1Bs are like seasoned professionals who've been working in their fields for decades and decades, and they just know so much more than the average American. Well, that's not true, because about a third rather, of H-1B recipients are from the ages of 25 to 34. Again, those are people my age directly competing with recent college grads, so we know that's not true. Also, the Economic Policy Institute, speaking just about the dollar numbers, they did a study and found that H-1Bs are paid in some jobs as much as 45% less than an American would pay. Other companies like Deloitte, an accounting firm, they had some of their documents from their company leak, and their company documents show that they were paying H-1Bs 10 to 15% less. So you could say it's low as 10, and 10% is a lot, but other studies are showing as high as 50%. You have companies like 7-Eleven applying for H-1Bs for a cashier that pays $30,000 to $40,000 a year. You have even big tech companies, Apple, Microsoft, others, applying for H-1Bs that would pay people. Again, these are supposedly the best and bright. These are the geniuses of the world, and yet the salaries only pay 70, 80 grand. I think for this year, the average was lower than 120 grand, the average salary of an H-1B, and about a quarter of them were making less than 75. So two things can't be true. These cannot be the Elon Musks of the world, the super geniuses of the world, and yet they're so smart and so talented that they can't even crack $100,000 in the United States. That's how you know it's bogus. It's all about the cheap labor. It's all about finding ways that companies can hire people for the least amount of money. And last thing before I turn it back to you, that's not the promise of the American free market. The free market is being corrupted. It's being used against the rest of us. These people pushing for the H-1B system like to hide behind the shield that is the free market. But this actually isn't the free market. I mean, in a free market, again, if you can't find the supply, you have to increase what you pay to get the demand out there for these workers. And that's not what they're doing. There's nothing about the free market that says, oh, let's go to the third world and just cheat the system, basically. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, because essentially what we're saying is the job market is the world. So we're including China and India that have billions of people between them, and all the rest of, Bangladesh is so dense. And so, in other words, they're competing. American workers are competing in a job market instead of, say, in the tech industry. I don't know how big the tech industry is, how many are in those fields there. But say it was 10 million Americans. But they're not competing with 9 million, 10 million other Americans for those same jobs, for whatever number of jobs there are. They're competing with billions of people in the United States. So does not just, we're talking about basic economics and basic, get a crayon out to do that equation, because we're really talking about, hello, if I'm competing and there's 100,000 other people that want my job, they can dictate to me what the salary is that they're going to pay me.
And by the way, for Americans out there who think that they're above that, they should know that really most people in this country, most of your jobs would be replaced by third world labor that would do it for cents on the dollar. So to think that, oh, well, no, my job would be safe. No, that would hurt all of us. And really, if you think about it, for most professions, could be done for less in the third world. Is that really the world that we all want to live in? Is that the country we want to live in, that we just outsource everything? Like you say, first it was the manufacturing jobs, and now it's the people, now it's the talent, now it's the jobs. One thing I really want to say quickly too is one argument that I make to people is, yes, there are problems with our education system. Most conservatives have been on that for the last 10 to 20 years. But that aside, our universities, I would argue, are still the best in the world. They have the best research centers. We have the best professors. We have the best hospital systems tied to our universities. I would put our universities, even some of the what we would call the woker ones, like some of the Ivy League schools, I would put those up against any other university in the world. There's a reason why millions and millions of people across the world want to go study at those schools. So again, two things can't be true. We cannot have the best universities, the best professors, and yet somehow two kids who go to the same school, an American and let's say a foreign student, both graduate from that school, and yet the American who has taken the same classes, gone through the same system, they're somehow just not smart enough. They don't have the talent. But the other foreign student who has done the exact same thing, suddenly, they're perfect. They have what you need. So we can't have the best universities, and we can't be pumping Americans through these university systems and then somehow say to ourselves, well, we just don't have the talent here. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass a basic logic test.
Well, India doesn't have a
lying.
top engineering school. Their schools they do not compete with American schools, not in computer technology, not in medicine. I looked at the top 100 universities or medical schools in the world, and India had 1 out of 100, and America's list was this long. So how are the doctors and the computer technology people coming in? They're actually going through their education, most of them, in their home nations. Then they're coming in here to get jobs. That's what H-1B is for. It's not for education. It's for jobs. And so they're coming in here having graduated, and they've graduated from a school that's not even close to the same standard as American universities or British universities, etc. So, when you brought up that 7-Eleven story, I am going to do a whole episode where I just go through who's actually and what kind of jobs and pay these various corporations are doing. I saw that the University of Minnesota, I couldn't believe it. They have an application in for something like 700 jobs. As if in the University of, we don't have enough professors. This is not, teaching American history does not require the best and the brightest from India, and teaching and, all the economics or whatever. We don't have enough professors even in the United States of America. And I don't know what else they are hiring for, but I suspect it could be the janitor, because when you're actually calling a 7-Eleven cashier and a line cook in restaurants and entry-level accounting. Imagine an entry-level accountant. They've got to go to India and bring them in because there's a shortage of young people that are graduating with accounting degrees. That is so laughable.
I was just about to bring up accounting. And by the way, if you don't believe Elizabeth or myself on this, we're not making this up. You can actually look up the companies that they post. They're required by law to post their H-1B applications for the positions. I saw one that was director of pickleball. I mean, no joke. Someone posted that on X that there was a company looking for a director of pickleball. And it's like, you go back to the accounting companies. Really, so the big four accounting companies, Deloitte just can't find an American kid who is an accountant in this country. There's not a single person in this country who's smart enough to be an accountant for Deloitte. It's laughable. It's a joke. And the only people who believe it are one or two. Number one, and sorry to be insulting, but it's true. If you believe any of what they're pushing, you're a moron. You have to be. Or number two, which I think is the more likely scenario, is you have some nefarious reason why you're pushing this. You stand to benefit somehow. Maybe it's your company that stands to benefit. Maybe it's someone you know personally. Whatever it may be. But the people who say they believe it, they're either foolish and ignorant, or they're not being honest about why they really support this system, because there's no other reason. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let me say this, that I've given this some thought since my very in-depth interview with Kevin Lynn of U.S. Tech Workers. He's just awesome. And so I had to limit it to just the medical field, bringing in doctors and changing our healthcare industry and our hospital systems and all this. And he brought up an example. And it was someone who was trying to get their residency. And you have to go before a panel, answer some questions. It's an interview. And he's got these people sitting there, just like you see in a movie scene, and they're all sitting across from him, kind of straight-faced and looking dour. Right. And he's just a regular American-looking guy. And they're all Indian. Everyone on this board that is going to decide who gets residencies, and there are thousands of American doctors they're the best and the brightest, they're the top, creme de la creme, and they cannot practice medicine because if you don't have your residency, you cannot practice medicine, even though you have graduated from medical school. And I thought, I'm an American, and I'm in America, and I am not embarrassed to say and ashamed to say that if I were on a board like this and I had Americans in here and I had people, it's not about Indians, could be from any country of the world, and they were equal in their talents. Do you know what I would choose every time? To take the coveted last spot as a resident? It would be the American, because my heart is for America. This is what America First, what MAGA is about, is as Americans, our heart is for America and Americans. This is our heritage. This is in our DNA.
Yes.
So what makes anybody think that if I was an Indian that loved my culture, and God bless that, I do not criticize that. I love my people. I love my culture. I love my language. I love my traditions. I love henna when people get married and all these things, part of the Indian culture. And I'm sitting across and I'm looking at an engineer, a computer engineer, and we're going to make a decision as to who gets hired. And I look at the Indian, he's come in through H-1B. He's got the same language, the culture, the background. He's got all of this, and the hardship and the being afraid to come to America and working this way and blah, blah, blah. All of these things that we share and the difficulties and everything, my heart goes out to him. Who do I hire? I don't believe anybody can legislate against the heart and the patriotism and the love of one's culture. And if there are a bunch of people and I would love to do a research on this, in HR departments of Microsoft and Adobe and all these other corporations that have high levels of foreign workers in it, I wonder who's running HR and where is their heart going to be? Yeah. Am I wrong?
And you're not wrong. And I know you said you wanted to keep it on H-1B, but I do have to bring up the university system again, because I think this is just one example as to why people are infuriated, why people who maybe wouldn't have even voted for Donald Trump 4 or 5 years ago felt compelled to do so now, is because people are sick and tired of Americans coming last. We are sick and tired of being treated like garbage compared to other people in our own country. In other words, foreigners in this country, people who just got here, whether you're an illegal who came under Joe Biden or you're an H-1B, they are many times treated better than American citizens are. I mean, just look at New York City, all of those illegals, those Biden migrants who received free hotels, free food, those $500 Visa debit cards. Meanwhile, Americans are left to sleep out in the streets or pay exorbitant rent prices in New York City. We are tired of being put last. It's an insult. It's a disgrace. And you look at the university systems. Let's take my alma mater, for example, the University of Florida. It is now a top 5 public school in the country. The demand to get into that school has increased. It was very tough to get in when I applied, but it has been that way really over the last 20 years, and it's just increasing and increasing and increasing. When I was there, I filed a public information request, and it's a public school, so they should have been required to provide me this information to get the numbers of international students who were at that campus, the number of international students who applied versus their acceptance rate versus the American citizen application numbers and their acceptance rates. Again, it all comes down to money. All of these public and private universities are able to charge international students more money to attend. International students pay more money to go to a school like the University of Florida than I would. And in Florida, we have a very generous system for in-state tuition residents. So in many cases, an international student could pay 3 or 4 times what I pay to go there. So if you ask yourself, are the universities going to admit people based off merit? Are they going to give favor to the American, or are they going to give favor to the person who will pay 3 to 4x what I'm paying so that they can cover the cost of their BS admin positions or silly diversity deans and things of that nature? And that is for a fact happening. And it's sad because and it doesn't, forget my school, but this is happening all across the country. I've seen and met kids, I know them personally, who grew up wanting to go to a school. They grew up busting their behinds all through high school, junior high, to get the best grades possible, to get the best test scores possible. And really, I know kids who were in the top 10 to 5 percentile of my high school class who couldn't get in to that school. And so that's not a question of they weren't talented enough. It's who was being accepted.
Did you
over
get
them. And
the documents? Did they provide those documents to you?
They provide. I'll have to go back and look it up, and you'll have to have me back. They did provide some numbers, but they didn't provide exactly what I was looking for in terms of the acceptance rate. They provided sort of a breakdown of the foreign students on the campus, and I've been pushing. There needs to be a large investigation of this at every state level of every state institution, every university system.
This should not be controversial. This should not be partisan. I mean, I look back at Barbara Jordan. I'm sure you have listened to her speeches and her report. She is so inspirational, and she's a Democrat, and she was just revered for just, I don't know, her I guess her character, and she was so highly respected. And she was put, was it Reagan that put her on immigration? I can't remember if it was Reagan.
Yeah, well, I think the Jordan Commission was maybe under Clinton. I don't know.
Maybe it was. Exactly. I don't remember. We'll find that out. But anyway, I want to do a series of videos. I've got the Dalai Lama in vision right now, too. I love this guy now. Couldn't care less before, but now he's on my top list. But Barbara Jordan and various people that have spoken so eloquently toward this. I would love to do just one show on Barbara. And especially, I'm going to have Carol Swain on. She did immigration from her perspective of, she's been quoted by the Supreme Court, of a Black American who came up. She grew up in a 2-room shack, and she is utterly brilliant, and she's going to have a lot to say about this. But I don't know. There's so much to continue to say. I just think that the investigations, I really want to put some people on investigating this, because I think that the darkness, when I saw at Christmas time that there were 7-Eleven and junior level accountants and line cooks and all the rest and there's other ways. We're not even talking about the way it's being gamed, because it's being gamed in ways with this lottery system. By the way, can a lottery system bring in the best and the brightest? If you have, say, 700,000 people that want to come into the United States, and we have 85,000 slots. By the way, we are if you think about it, our needs must be not be that great, because if you're filling it up with things like line cooks in restaurants and 7-Eleven clerks and whatever that other thing was that the ball guy, whatever that you said you saw. Anyway, if you're filling it up with that, then certainly all these 85,000 people aren't needed in the tech industry or the medical industry. So they're already, when you start breaking down these numbers, it's going to start falling apart. But we need to investigate what's really happening at these universities. When the University of Michigan needs 785 employees, foreign employees, I think that's a big problem. Maybe you've said this repeatedly throughout the hour, and I think it's important. It's not about India or China or these other countries. It's about this country. And I really resent the fact that anytime you have any conversation about immigration, whether it's H-1B, whether it's about foreign students on our campus, whether it's about the millions of people Biden has let in, you always get this response from the media, or even maybe people in your daily lives, for the audience back home, and they'll say things like, oh, but the poor so-and-so who's coming from Mexico, and the poor lady with her 2 young kids, oh my gosh, in this country. Well, what the hell? What about Americans? I mean, where is that sympathy for Americans? Why is it our duty? This country is the most generous in the world. Our people, year after year, give more to charity than any other country in the world. We have liberated Europe twice. We have liberated a lot of countries. We haven't always done the right thing, but I think we have tried, and we have tried to correct that where we've been wrong as a country.
we've done a lot of good in the world is what I'm trying to say. Why is it our obligation to continue taking care of the world's poor, to continue taking care of the rest of the world's problems? Why are we the dumping ground for everybody else's sob story? I mean, I'm sorry. We sympathize. We've always done what we can, but enough's enough. What about our own people? I think that's the message I would send home if again, I thank Trump for making the immigration issue, or at least our position on it, more mainstream. But there was a while there where you couldn't articulate the views that you and I are articulating here without getting some ridiculous response of, oh, you're a racist, you just hate this person or that person. And it's not about that. I mean, even the H-1B thing, I know people in my extended family, friends, I told you off camera beforehand, I have some family in Latin America. I know people who would benefit from that system and want it. And I have no problem saying to you here, yeah, there are people personally in my life who the H-1B would probably help, but I'm not ashamed to say that I think it's a bad system for America, because despite these people I know in other countries, I'm an American first. And if I'm being asked to weigh in on what's good for this country has to put its people first. Why is it, if we live in a country, that Americans can't be at the forefront of every policymaker's line? Why are we continuing to think, oh, what would be good for these poor people in Mexico? Or what would be good for these people in India?
Just think of a family. The reason why the family has always, since the creation of this world, been the, the bedrock or the keystone of any culture, any society. Why? Because there's a cohesive unit where there's a mom and a dad, there are kids, there might be grandma and grandpa, brothers and sisters, and they're all looking out for one another. If you extrapolate that into say we have 100 million households, just making that up. And if we had 100 million households where mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, the little kids, the babies, the extended brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, we're all taking care of each other, guess what would happen? We'd have educated, obedient, peaceful, prosperous, less crime, no welfare, because you have to have a unit where everybody has a kinship of some sort, where they instantly will defend that cultural unit, that family unit, or whatever it is. In America, like a big family, if we're not looking out for each other, can we really solve the problems of the world when we've got unemployment and men who have left, working age men between 18 and 45 that have left the workforce and no longer are looking for a job, are in the millions? But we're importing people instead of lifting these guys and girls up and putting them back to work and giving them the self-esteem, taking them off drugs because they're depressed, and putting their families back together just by having a cohesive national culture where we're all looking out for each other. And that's called America First, isn't it?
It is. And the fact that we've gotten to a place in this country where those leaders are hard to come by, where having a leader who puts America first is considered a rarity, that shows you how far we've fallen as a country. It used to be both Democrats and Republicans, though they disagreed on maybe how to put America first. They did value this country. So I'm hoping we can get back to that. And like Trump or not, I mean, I would advise you to at least consider this. At least every time Trump is making a decision about this country, he is thinking of our interests first. He's not thinking about, again, what's good for Mexico, or what might be good for Europe, what might be good for the rest of the world or the global community. That's what you get under Joe Biden. A lot of his decision making was made with the interest of, well, what's good for the international community? What is good for everybody else? Enough of that. We're tired of being walked over. We want to live in a country, as you say, that puts our people first. And another problem, too, that you could spend a whole episode on is, a lot of the people who come here from other countries, yeah, maybe they're glad to be here, but that's a whole other conversation in and of itself of how a lot of immigrants in this country have a dual loyalty to their home country, and often that comes at the detriment of supporting American policies. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know who are of Hispanic or Latin American origin who feel that because they were allowed into this country, we need to support open border policies as well. And it's just like, but you're in America now. I mean, what? So I'm obliged to just support the invasion because I speak the same. It's a whole other thing that has long bothered me. But I'm glad we're able to have these conversations. One thing really quickly too, it's as an aside, you mentioned the doctors and the shortage of doctors in this country. That's another example as well. I mean, maybe there is a short-term shortage right now of doctors, but let's ask ourselves, why that is. And again, it's because of government interference. The government has interfered and artificially increased the demand for medical services in this country. How? By allowing 10 to 20 million non-citizens who don't pay into the system, who don't have healthcare, come into this country. They flood them to the cities and the urban centers, and that has increased dramatically the demand for medical care. I mean, I live in Miami, Florida. We have a lot of illegals here. I'm sure your audience has experienced this too, wherever they live. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to get a doctor's appointment now? I mean, you have to wait. We've always, for a long time, made fun of Canada, but we're slowly becoming a country that it does take you about 3 months to get a doctor's appointment.
American doctors are going out of business, though. Many of them,
yes.
I'm hearing from all over, that my doctor just said, I can't compete anymore. I'm just retiring.
There's that element too of it as well. But again, we're living in a country now where it's not necessarily that there aren't enough doctors for the amount of Americans that we are here. We just have a country with 40 million illegal immigrants that, are entitled to get healthcare as well. And as a result, we're all competing in the same system. You can't do that. You can't have a government artificially increasing the demand for things that's going to lower the quality of Americans, and yet here we are, the quality of life, I should say.
That's a really good point. Gosh, so much to talk about. This series is going to go on for years. Anyway, you have been brilliant, as I thought you would be, and I really appreciate your insight, your analysis, your thoughts on this, and I'm definitely going to have you back and talk about other facets of this problem. It's just been terrific. But you know what? The whole point is we've got to be educated and know we have to understand this so that we can make our voices heard on social media, get it to President Trump, because I know what he's for. He's for America first, but he's a human being, and we don't want the rudder changing course before we even get started on this. We've got to win on this one issue. So we want to hear more voices like yours, and we'll have you back. Thanks a lot for joining me, Eduardo.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much.